So we serve about 100 clients every year on education topics. And as I said, that's across public, private, and the social sector. And we serve clients on everything from early childhood education through to K-12 to vocational, higher education, and lifelong learning, and on every continent of the world. So about 30% of that work touches on education technology in a meaningful way. And the kinds of questions we have really depend on the type of client. But, for example, for systems and institutions, some of the questions that might get asked is, how can we recruit, support, and develop talented teachers and leaders to serve our students? Or how do we align our resources in our organization to drive better outcomes? How can we harness technology better to improve access and quality? And then, of course, more recently, the big question has been, how do we reopen schools safely? And how do we improve hybrid and remote learning? And then on the corporate side, we're looking a lot at where and what are the best market opportunities? How do we design our offerings to meet user needs, overcome barriers to adoption, and who can we partner with to increase our reach and impact? As well as doing direct client work, we also invest significantly in knowledge, and sometimes that can be in partnership with organizations like UNESCO. As the pandemic hit, UNESCO was very quick to set up the Global Education Coalition, and we then partnered with them as part of that coalition to create a series of toolkit on how should education systems be responding to this crisis, kind of along the whole arc of the crisis, right from the initial response through to how do you think about setting up effective remote and hybrid learning, through to how do you re-enroll students, which has been a real issue in a lot of countries, as you've seen increased dropouts through the crisis, to when you get students back in person, how do you accelerate their learning to help them catch up what they've lost? And then kind of across the board, how do you organize for your response, which I think is often forgotten, but is critical in terms of the collaboration that's been needed really across different types of agencies and across different levels of education. And so that kind of collaborative knowledge building, we built that in partnership with UNESCO, but also with many of the country governments who are struggling with this through workshops and interviews and drawing on some of the client work we were doing at the time as well. So we had folks on our workshop from Europe, we had folks from Africa, from the Middle East, from several in Latin America, and we did actually deep dive work in Latin America and in the Middle East. And then as well, during the crisis, we were working with governments as client work. I've been working with US states and districts. Around the world, our partners have been working with systems as they've worked out how to respond. I think as we thought about what governments should be doing in response to COVID, there was obviously a lot going on. There's a health crisis. You're in the middle of a health crisis. You absolutely have to think about prioritizing health. You're in the middle of an economic crisis. You've got to be aware that these students are in the midst of potentially parents losing their jobs, some real economic fragility, students maybe not being able to find food as school meal programs have been put on hold. And then you're in an educational crisis where students are potentially having significant disruptions to their learning. And so as we thought about what the response should be, there is, I think, a couple of guiding principles. The first is a focus on equity across the board. So prioritizing help to those students who need it most, and really starting with an understanding of student needs across health and economics and nutrition and learning, because schools are often in that central point in their community. I think then as we actually work out, well, what are the tactical priorities? That there were a few. The first is, how do we get kids back into school safely? What are the right health protocols? How do you prioritize schooling as you think about the broader economic options? How do you make sure you're rolling vaccinations out to teachers in a way that can get students back in the classroom? The second is, in some places, it may not be safe to get kids back into school. So how do you prioritize student learning and thriving across modalities? And that includes academics, but it's not just academics. The social, emotional, the mental health piece is really important. I think the third priority is, how do you support teachers and staff? This has been a tremendously difficult year for teachers as well. And thinking not just about the tactical training on remote learning and how to do hybrid learning, but also paying attention to teachers' mental health and their broader needs, I think is really important at this time. And that seems like a lot, but we don't want to end there, because if we end there, we're just focused on what we're doing today. And one of the things we're really encouraging systems to do is think now around, how do you plan for acceleration and re-enrollment that's going to be required? And how do you build back better as you are? How do you reimagine your systems as you re-enter into the fall? What opportunities does this provide you to rethink elements of your school system to build back for a better future? So I think one area where I'm particularly excited about this is the potential in low and middle income countries. There's a lot of emerging interest and potential around innovative financing in education. And there's a range of different investors, from pure philanthropy through to impact investment, through to more traditional financial investors who are beginning to think about investing in education. And I think what's important as we look at that trend is to ensure that that money is being leveraged in a way that achieves not just financial, but also social outcomes. And that those deals are structured in a way that actually puts the student at the center. And there are a number of different approaches being piloted. There's development impact bonds, income share agreements, creative use of remittances. And in fact, USAID just launched a Catalyze initiative to build a community of practice across some of the investors and implementers in this space. And even during COVID, UNESCO, for example, and the Global Education Coalition brought together some of these public and private and social sector players to support school systems. And so I think that there is more openness to some of the role that private sector capital can play in helping to achieve better student outcomes. Sure. So I think maybe before I jump in is maybe a little bit of a definition of how I think about the EdTech space, because I think there's many different elements of it. So the first piece is there's obviously the EdTech for students, for learning. And it's all around what is the technology that's going to help students learn better. There's a second piece that's also student focused that's more about digital skills. How do you help students learn the skills that they're going to need, not around specifically tech for learning math, but tech for learning coding or tech for learning typing. So really around the digital skills, or especially one of the ones that I'm particularly curious about is helping students search the internet better and be able to tell what's true and what isn't, and what is a good source and what is, so that the whole digital literacy piece. So that's the student side. There's then this whole piece around tech for teachers, and how do you improve collaboration of teachers? How do you save teacher time, take off some of the admin pieces of a teacher's job, but to enable teachers to do their jobs better? And then there's a whole tech for systems piece, which is around technology for performance management, running your system, kind of digitization of your system. And so I think across those three, some of the things that I find specifically exciting, one is on the tech for learning side, technology for literacy and numeracy in low-income countries that really struggle with the human capital that's needed for quality teaching. We're talking about countries where, in some cases, they can't find teachers who speak the language in which they're meant to instruct, or they can't find enough teachers to reduce class sizes below like 50 or 60 kids. And so one approach that I've been interested in is Imagine Worldwide, which is a nonprofit that's actually done some RCT trials, looking at tablets that are preloaded with high quality literacy and numeracy content. And they are, all of the content is downloaded, so they don't need internet access. They're solar powered, they're extremely robust. They actually showed literacy gains of 5 months of additional learning over a year. So potential for opportunities like that. I think there's a lot of opportunity for that to go wrong. We also see from the PISA results that on average, when students who use a tablet in the classroom perform about half a year behind students who don't use a tablet in the classroom. So it's not the hardware that matters, it's the hardware with the software, with the link into curriculum and quality content and the professional development of the teachers. And so there's that whole chain that needs to work, and just throwing a bunch of tablets at kids doesn't cut it. But if you can do it right, I think it can be transformative. I think a couple of the other opportunities that are really exciting to me, one is on the teacher side, really supporting teachers to understand better what students know and can do. I mean, the core of the teacher's job is understanding for each student in their class what they know and can do and what they need to do next in order to get to the next step. And some of the current formative assessments can be really helpful in helping teachers to be able to identify that really quickly across the whole classroom. Something I'm excited by, but I think there's still a big opportunity in, is this tech for differentiation, where there's many adaptive math programs out there that have shown great outcomes kind of by themselves. But the really tricky part is how to integrate them into school systems and curriculums and classes. So being able, and this I think is where the private and the public kind of need to collaborate better, is you have these great private companies creating these wonderful adaptive math programs, and then you have these public systems that have got great curriculum and standards and approaches. And how do you actually merge both so that you can get a real mastery-based learning approach into the classroom? Where can we apply what we know about learning science to where technology can help to bolster that? And so, another example is quizzes, right? One of the things that we know from learning science is that retrieval practice, trying to remember something, to write it down, to take a test on it, actually helps you to learn it better. And so, and yet tests are stressful, but quizzes are fun. And so one of the things tech can do is integrate fun quizzes into the classroom in a way that doesn't feel high stress, can be really quick at the beginning of the class, but can also help the teacher identify, what are the errors that students are making? Have they mixed up the numerator and the denominator in fractions? And that can actually be a teaching tool. What's interesting is there are going to be some things that really stay the same. I think the teacher is still going to be in the center of the classroom. The teacher is still going to be the critical role in education. I've read things that suggest, we don't need teachers anymore. We just give kids, a computer and they're going to work it out. I don't believe that at all. I think the teacher and teaching and excellent teaching is going to continue to be right in the center of all of education. And I think even more so because as we look forwards to the future of work, what's more important going forwards is not, data collection and processing and memorizing facts. It's the, obviously a knowledge base is critical, but then how do you apply that knowledge? How do you apply expertise? How do you collaborate effectively? And so human teachers are going to continue to be the people who can develop those kinds of collaborative relationships and support students to gain those kinds of skills. So though the teacher is still in the center, I do think there might be different models of how the teacher is engaging. And so I am hoping that we can, to some extent, support teachers to be doing less admin through technology. So less manual grading, for example, less having to search for preparation for their classes, and more coaching and facilitating and really supporting students. Beyond kind of the teacher, there's what are the children learning? And I think that, again, there's going to be real elements of continuity. We're not going to throw out literacy and numeracy. We're not going to throw out knowledge. It's important to have, you can't code if you can't write and do math, right? And so there is going to be these really important elements of continuity, but at the same time, I think we need to broaden the aperture a bit around how do you actually apply some of that knowledge and skills that you're gaining? And also, how do we think about education not just as a set of academic skills, but really developing future citizens and future human beings who are going to thrive? And so thinking about that whole child, the social, emotional, the mindsets piece, I think has been integrated really well in some schools, but still has a long way to go in others. And I would hope that every school really is looking at that whole child perspective going forwards. You talked about technology. Technology is an enabler of some of those things. And I think that technology can enable two things especially. One is that access point where all students can access the best teaching. And we talked a little bit about what that might look like in lower middle income countries, but in high income countries, it could be accessing electives that you couldn't access at your local high school, but are available at a high school down the road. And then technology for mastery. And so how do we crack that personalized learning nut to really get every child able to be challenged every day in school, working on difficult problems and mastering them? And then the last piece is around how do we help people to show the skills that they have, not only through pieces of paper, but also kind of through skills-based credentials. And I think this is a really important point for equity. And equity, I think, is critical across the board here. But often as employers are looking for employees, they're looking at the pieces of paper they have rather than the demonstrated skills that they can actually perform. And so the more that we can shift towards that so that we're rewarding people for what they know and can do, not for which test they passed. I think the more we're going to have a rewarding education system and a workforce that's more equitable.